Hey guys, tonight we begin our journey with something unexpectedly personal. Not war, not royalty, not grand feasts. No, tonight, you squat beside a wooden bucket, under a leaking thatched roof, trying not to make eye contact with the stranger, sitting 10 feet away, doing the same thing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your city and what time it is where you are. Let's see how far our sleepy history circle reaches tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a cramped little chamber above a tavern. The air smells like wood smoke stew, and something less pleasant you can't quite name. You've just arrived in a medieval town for the first time. It's early evening. The streets are winding down, and so are your intestines. You ask the innkeeper where the nearest facility is. He looks at you blankly and gestures vaguely at a corner of the room, a ceramic bowl with a lid. It's not a joke. You're looking at your first chamber pot. It's glazed, kind of pretty, and according to the innkeeper, just empty it out. The window in the morning. You blink. You're supposed to hold it all night, and then launch it onto the street at sunrise. Apparently, yes. You're now part of the medieval sanitation system, and guess what? There's no privacy. If you need to go after sundown, you'll probably be doing it in the same room you sleep in, maybe even with your family or fellow travelers nearby. Some people even shared a chamber pot. If you're lucky, you've got your own. If you're really lucky, you've got the courage to use it. Strangely, chamber pots weren't seen as shameful. They were part of the furniture, like a wooden bench or a footstool. In fact, in wealthier homes, they were ornately painted. Some even had witty phrases etched inside the rim. It was like a medieval version of motivational bathroom quotes. But, even so, people did try to be discreet. Many households kept their pots hidden in wooden cabinets or beneath seats with hinged lids. The idea was, out of sight, out of mind, which worked until it was full. The next morning, you carry it downstairs, hoping not to trip, and dump it into the street gutter. That's where most of it went, directly into the open drain that ran down the middle of the road. Some cities had regulations against tossing it out the window, but many people did it anyway. Historical records show people often shouted Gardez-vous, from the French regardes l'eau, or watch out for the water, before emptying their waste from above. It was a kind of warning, and if you didn't hear it in time, well, medieval laundry was an art for a reason. Chamber pots were used by everyone, from peasants to kings. King Louis XIV of France famously received visitors while sitting on a special commode. In some courts, the royal groom of the stool was an actual job, essentially the king's toilet assistant. That's how important chamber duties were. Still, despite the practicality, you can't help but feel a little awkward. There's something about holding a warm ceramic bowl filled with your own digestive triumphs that makes you think, maybe the past isn't so romantic after all. But hey, welcome to medieval hygiene. Asterisk, you wake early the next morning, the sun barely crawling over the rooftops. And already you can hear the sounds of buckets being scraped and boots clomping toward the outhouse. Today's adventure, visiting your first privy, the medieval version of an outdoor toilet. It's not far. Just a few steps beyond the courtyard, past a sleepy goat and a pile of yesterday's cabbage leaves. But as you get closer, a certain aura fills the air. The door is wooden, slightly warped, and creaks as you push it open. Inside is a narrow bench with a large hole in the middle. Beneath that hole, nothing but a yawning pit, a deep, smelly, bug-filled pit. You sit carefully. The bench is cold, the air damp. There is no paper. Of course, just a handful of moss, straw, or, if you're lucky, some reused scraps of cloth. You don't want to think too hard about where those cloths have been. Still, it could be worse. You could be using the public privy in the town square, basically a big wooden platform with several holes in a row. No stalls, no privacy, just you, your neighbors, and the awkward silence of synchronized squatting. You find yourself making eye contact with a stranger. You both look away immediately. No one talks in the privy. It's the unspoken rule. Historians debate how often these pits were empty door, even if they were at all. In many places, the waste was left to pile up until someone finally complained, or the smell began to affect property values. Some towns built their privies over streams so the waste would self-manage, which, predictably, contaminated the water and made everyone sick. Back in your little outhouse, you notice something moving near the edge of the hole. A rat, maybe, or something worse. You don't want to find out. You finish your business as quickly as possible, trying not to breathe too deeply, and step outside for some fresh air. But as the door swings shut behind you, you realize something else. There's no lock. Anyone could have walked in, and sometimes they did. People were robbed, attacked, even kidnapped while using privies. In cities, nighttime toilet crime was real enough that some folks simply held it until dawn. You glance up at the second-floor windows of nearby homes. It's not hard to imagine a chamber pot being emptied just as you're walking by, which reminds you, always check above the town, as a hole smells faintly of smoke, cooked onions, and yesterday's collective digestion. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your dignity. You try to comfort yourself with the thought that at least the Romans had better plumbing. But those glory days are long gone, and medieval Europe isn't quite as interested in indoor engineering. Still, the privy serves a purpose. It's simple, it's brutal, it works, and now that you've survived your first full visit, you understand what it means to truly earn your breakfast. You finally get invited to a local castle, not as royal. Not get ahead of ourselves, but as a curious guest. Maybe someone who knows how to mend boots or copy texts. Either way, you're inside now. It's grand, at least by medieval standards. Stone walls rise above you, tapestries cover the drafts, and the floor beneath your feet is made of packed earth mixed with herbs to cover the smell of, well, everything else. You marvel at the feasting hall. The armor in the corner, the fireplace roaring with spit-roasted meat. And then, you ask the question no one wants to ask. So, where's the bathroom? The steward raises an eyebrow. He points up, way up, and that's how you discover the garderobe. It sounds elegant. French even. Maybe it's a wardrobe, a dressing room. Nope, it's a toilet. And not just any toilet, it's a hole in the wall that leads straight down the outer face of the castle. You climb a narrow staircase, duck under a wooden beam, and find a little stone room that juts out from the wall like a swallow's nest. There's a wooden seat with a hole. Beneath the hole is the air, just air. And eventually, the moat. You sit with one hand on the cold wall for balance, the other clutching your cloak against the wind, whipping through the opening. And yes, you're slightly terrified. What if you fall? What if the stone cracks? What if someone's down there? Historians argue whether castle garderobes were ever actually cleaned. Some believe servants regularly scraped the outer walls and shoveled waste from the bottom. Others think it just stayed there for years, maybe decades. If you're lucky, your host provides a bit of cloth for wiping. If you're really lucky, it's clean, and the smell, oh, it wafts right back up. Especially in summer. That's why, interestingly, people hung their clothes in the garderobe. Yes, where the toilet was. Why? Because the smell was believed to ward off moths. So your cloak might not be clean, but at least it's moth-free. You step out of the little room, adjusting your tunic and trying to forget the wind, the height, and the faint splatter you may or may not have heard. One day, someone will invent plumbing. But today is not that day. Back in the hall, no one mentions it. No one asks how your trip went. There's an unspoken rule in castles. Everyone poops, but no one talks about how terrifying it is to do it from 30 feet above a moat. You sit down to dinner, eyeing the goblet of wine, and wondering just how clean the kitchen water really is. It's festival season in the village. There's music, dancing, suspicious meat pies, and more people than the market square usually sees in a week. It's lively, it's joyful, and it's about to be a sanitary nightmare. Because medieval crowds meant medieval toilet emergencies. You notice there's no line of portable toilets, no neat rows of compostable stalls. What you do see is the occasional man ducking behind a stable, or a woman disappearing into the tree line, followed by the quiet rustle of skirts and maybe a relieved sigh. Congratulations. You've discovered the outdoor bathroom tradition. Most commoners didn't have access to proper privies. In fact, many homes didn't even have chamber pots. Fields, forests, riversides all were fair game, so you wander off to a more secluded part of the village edge, trying not to make eye contact with others doing the same thing. You find a bush, crouch low, and suddenly appreciate just how important soft moss can be. You also learn to look out for nettles, because that lesson, it only takes one time. Children were taught early where to go and where not to go. There were rules even, if they weren't written down. Some areas were communal relief zones. Others, like the vegetable gardens, were strictly off limits. Scholars still debate how much of this human waste was reused. Yes, reused. In some places, farmers collected it known as night soil to fertilize crops. It wasn't common everywhere, but it did happen, especially in places with scarce animal manure. You take in the scenery, open fields, birds chirping, the occasional goat staring at you far too knowingly. It's peaceful, in a way, and then you realize you forgot to bring anything to wipe with you. Reach for a handful of broad leaves, and hope for the best. When you return to the festival, you notice something else. There's a faint but distinct smell hovering over the crowd. Not strong enough to ruin the mood, just enough to remind you that medieval people, despite the music and the flowers, lived up close and personal with their biology. You sip your watered wine, join a circle dance, and think to yourself, there are many reasons. The past is best appreciated from a distance. You're staying the night at a monastery. It's quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that makes every footstep sound like a thunderclap, and every creak of your cot feel like a sin. You wake before dawn, stirred by the bell for matins, the monk's early prayer, but something else stirs too. Deep in your stomach, you need to go fast. You shuffle down a stone corridor, lit only by a flickering oil lamp. The hallway narrows, the stone colder, and soon you arrive at a small arched doorway. Inside, rows of communal stone seats, side by side, no dividers. Just a long bench with evenly spaced openings, each leading down into a shared channel. Congratulations, you've discovered the monastic latrine. There are no doors, no partitions, no privacy. Just you, a dozen ghostly pale monks, and a mutual agreement not to make eye contact. You sit, you wait, you pretend the echoing sounds aren't real. The system here is surprisingly advanced though. Water from a nearby stream is diverted under the latrine to help carry away the waste. Some monasteries even had 2 levels, with waste falling from the upper latrine into a lower collection channel. Medieval gravity engineering at its finest. Historians disagree on just how clean these places were. Some say monks were meticulous about hygiene, washing regularly and rotating cleaning duties. Others suggest the cleanliness part was more spiritual than literal, meaning lots of prayer, not necessarily soap. Either way, it's a step above the chamber pot. You notice a bucket of straw nearby, possibly for wiping, or maybe to throw down after use. The monks don't explain. They simply finish, pull their robes back into place, and glide silently back into the halls like nothing happened. You, on the other hand, are left staring at the thin veil of moonlight trickling through the high window, wondering if anyone's ever felt truly at peace while going number 2 in a room full of chanting men. Back in your cot, the silence returns. But now you know, even in a place built for contemplation, nature still calls on a schedule of its own, and it does not care if you're halfway through Psalms. Asterisk, you've made it to the city, not a sprawling metropolis. Mind you, just a bustling medieval town with crooked wooden houses, narrow cobblestone alleys, and people who are far too comfortable, dumping questionable things from second-story windows. Your first lesson: don't walk too close to the walls, ever. There's a phrase you begin to hear from every other corner, almost like a warning chant: Gardy Lou. That's your cue to look up and move, because someone is about to empty a chamber pot directly into the street. Yes, chamber pots, your new best friend and worst nightmare. They're simple ceramic or metal bowls kept under the bed or beside a chair, used in the middle of the night when walking to the outhouse or anywhere really just isn't worth the risk. You borrow one from your host. It's warm from sitting too close to the fireplace, and it has a faint crack down the side. You lift it ever so carefully, and do your business with the resigned dignity of someone who knows this is as good as it gets. And then comes the real decision. What do you do with the contents? Here in town, there's a kind of informal schedule. At certain times of day, typically early morning or late evening, residents shout the warning cry, then toss their chamber pots offering out the window, ideally into the middle of the street. You watch this ritual with awe. A man in a red tunic lifts his window, shouts Gardy Lou, and tips the pot like he's watering the daisies. Except the daisies are the feet of a distracted fishmonger. He shouts. The man laughs. Life continues. You quickly realize the middle of the street has become a kind of moving river of filth, slowly rolling downhill toward the nearest drainage ditch or, in some unfortunate towns, directly into the water supply. And yet people still gather in the streets, children playing, merchants shouting, dogs sniffing. You begin to understand medieval shoes, thick soles, raised heels, sometimes made entirely of wooden platforms. Not a fashion choice's survival tool. Scholars still debate whether people considered this disgusting or simply normal. Some historians argue that towns had strict laws about when and where waste could be dumped. Others think those laws were about as effective as a wet parchment umbrella. Either way, the system, if you can call it that, worked just enough to avoid total collapse. You spend your first evening in town weaving between puddles, eyeing windows above and trying not to think about what's stuck in the grooves of your borrowed boots. When nature calls again that night, you stare at the chamber pot. It stares back. You sit. You go. You set it down, lid slightly askew, and then you lie awake, wondering, what if I drop it on the stairs tomorrow? What if I forget to shout? What if I hit someone important? Morning comes. You lift the pot carefully. Open the window. Your voice trembles. Gardy Lou. Nothing. You try again. Louder, Gardy Lou. And then, with a deep breath and a sincere apology to the cobblestones, you tip it out. You feel strange. Like you've joined a strange civic ritual that spans centuries of poorly managed plumbing. Down below, a stray cat dashes away. A passing merchant glares up at you. But for one brief sunlit moment, you are medieval now. Eventually, you start to wonder, what did people use for toilet paper? Because after crouching behind hedges, balancing on castle perches, or sharing a silent monastery bench, you realize that one essential item is still missing from your medieval bathroom experience. The answer. It's complicated. You begin your search with optimism. Surely there must be some medieval equivalent of a roll, right? A neatly folded square. A soft, comforting cloth. Well, sort of. You start in the countryside. There, people often used whatever was around, which usually meant leaves, moss, hay, or even handfuls of straw. One man swears by dock leaves. Another praises lamb's ear for its texture. Someone mentions smooth river stones with such reverence you almost believe him. You test each in turn. Leaves surprisingly decent. Moss soft but tricky to collect. Absolutely not. It's not just about comfort though. There's also class. If you're rich or at least connected, you might have access to cloth scraps, bits of linen, or even old wool. Some castles kept baskets near the garderobe filled with rags. These weren't single-use, mind you. They were washed and reused. How thoroughly? That, dear listener, remains a matter of heated academic debate. In public bathhouses, you spot an odd tool. A tersorium, a sponge on a stick, used communally and rinsed in salt water or vinegar between uses. You politely decline. In monasteries, there's talk of special left-hand usages. The left hand was reserved for cleaning, while the right hand remained pure. This led to whole cultural etiquettes around handshakes and which hand to eat with. You suddenly understand why etiquette books were so popular. You ask around the marketplace. One elderly woman claims she just doesn't bother. A good wiggle, she says, and a long walk home. You decide not to test that. 1. Some towns, especially in parts of Asia and the Islamic world, developed early water cleaning practices using pitchers or ladles. In Europe, though, water was often too precious or too dirty to use for cleaning. And here's where historians still can't agree. Were medieval people as dirty as we think, or just differently clean? Many scholars argue that medieval folk had their own standards of hygiene, ones that made sense given their environment, resources, and beliefs. Others point to records of terrible odors, skin conditions, and plague outbreaks as evidence that, well, the system needed work. You, meanwhile, are learning through trial and error. You invent your own ranking system. Leaves are a solid 7/10. Moss, 8 if dry. Cloth rags, 9 but only if no one else used them first. Eventually, you land on a personal favorite, a looped rag tied to your belt, ready for reuse and rinsing. It's not glamorous, but it's better than the pine cones a child once offered you. And here's a strange thought that hits you while you're perched on a hillside. For thousands of years, no one had toilet paper and they got by. Some even argue they were better off. Fewer clogged pipes, no wasteful rolls, a deeper connection to the environment. If you count knowing which plants won't leave you itching for 3 days. Still, as you dust off your hands and head back to town, you can't help but dream of the future. Of quilted sheets and triple ply clouds, of the satisfying spin of a roll on a metal bar. But for now, you tuck your rag back into your belt, hold your head high, and stride through the town like someone who's seen things, survived things, because you have. And that deserves a standing ovation, or at least a hot bath. Asterisk, by now. You've developed a sixth sense, a toilet sense. You can spot a privy by the shape of a shed, the smell in the air, or the telltale dip in a wooden seat. You've memorized which bushes are friendly and which ones hide thorns. You've accepted that every building, no matter how grand, has its own special kind of bathroom horror. And then you hear about Castle, Garderobes. Yes, the royal restroom. You arrive at a stone fortress perched atop a rocky cliff, expecting grandeur, and you get it kind of. Thick walls, towering battlements, guards in iron helmets. And then, someone points out a strange little box jutting out from the castle wall, several stories above the ground. That, they say, is where the Lord takes care of business. You peer inside and see, a stone seat with a hole underneath, open air, or a chute leading to a pit. Sometimes it drops directly into the moat, sometimes into a collection trench, sometimes, well, it's best not to think about sometimes. You sit, hesitantly. There's a breeze, a strong breeze, because the garderobe is essentially a medieval cliff toilet. There's no door, just a curtain. If you're lucky, the stone is cold, the echo unsettling, and the drop. Let's just say you wouldn't want to lose your pouch down there. Still, this was a status symbol. Not everyone had a toilet that emptied itself more or less. Castles were built with vertical waste shafts, sometimes with clever grooves and ventilation to carry away smells. Some even had multi-seat arrangements, so you and your noble friends could chat while relieving yourselves. A social affair, if you will. Of course, historians still argue whether these chutes were cleaned regularly. Some say servants, often young boys, were tasked with scraping waste from pits below. Others suggest castle toilets were only used during sieges. When going outside was impossible, you ask a servant how it works. He shrugs. Just don't drop anything important. He then adds that nobles sometimes stored clothes in garderobes. Clothes because people believed the strong ammonia fumes from waste would kill lice and pests. You mentally cross off castle closet from your medieval Airbnb wish list. Later that night, nature calls again. You light a tallow candle, wrap your cloak tightly, and step toward the tower edge. The stars are bright. The wind whistles. Below, the cliff fades into darkness. You sit carefully, clutching the stone seat like a sailor during a storm. The moment is both absurd and majestic. You, a mere time-traveling traveler, perched over the side of a medieval stronghold, experiencing the exact same discomfort as a 14th-century duke. Somehow, that feels comforting until the wind blows out your candle, and you realize you left your belt rag inside. Still, as you shuffle back to your chamber, you feel oddly accomplished. You faced the castle toilet and lived to tell the tale. Tomorrow, they say you'll see how the queen's bathroom worked. You sincerely hope it's just a bit warmer. After conquering the windy heights of castle toilets, you wake the next morning with one lingering question. How did medieval people keep any of this clean? So you go looking not for more bathrooms, but for cleaners. The true unsung heroes of medieval sanitation. You start in the city again. There's a man with a cart and a wide-brimmed hat, pushing a barrel that smells like a mistake. He's a gong farmer, gloriously medieval term for someone whose job is to clean out cesspits, privy trenches, and anywhere else waste liked to settle. He's the one who makes sure the communal pits don't overflow. He's the one who crawls beneath the castle to scrape the refuse from the garderobe shaft. He's the one no one wants to stand next to in the tavern, but who everyone secretly respects. Gong farmers were often paid surprisingly well. Danger pay, really. The pits they worked in were filled not just with human waste, but also dead animals, rotting garbage, and the occasional forgotten chamber pot. One misstep and well, no one wants to talk about what happens. You watch as the gong farmer lowers himself into a cesspit behind a merchant's house. He uses a wooden paddle to stir the sludge, then a large ladle to transfer it into a bucket, then into the barrel, then onto the cart. He whistles the whole time. He tells you the waste is often taken outside city walls and sold to farmers as fertilizer. Yes, sold. Medieval people were nothing if not pragmatic. Then you meet his assistant, a young woman with her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied in a scarf, and a look that says, "I'm not here for jokes." She explains that during hot months, they have to work fast. Heat means smell, and smell means complaints. But too fast, and you risk splashing. You take a respectful step back. Some monasteries had designated workers, 2 people responsible for cleaning the latrines, scrubbing the floor stones with vinegar or ash, and keeping pest populations from turning into plagues. These folks were often considered part of a spiritual act of humility. Cleaning was service to God. In cities, laws existed in parchment, at least that required property owners to maintain their latrines and prevent overflows. There were even rules about how deep cesspits could be and how far they had to be from wells. Historians still debate how often these rules were enforced. Some towns had public sanitation officers, Others had reputation. If your pit leaked into your neighbor's yard, you might find your house mysteriously egged with week-old duck yolks. You also find early examples of composting. Some wealthy homes kept separate pits for urine and solid waste, believing that urine, called chamber lye, could be used in textile bleaching, leather tanning, or even as detergent. Yes, people washed clothes with pee. You let that fact settle. You visit a clothworker. WHO shows you her bucket labeled Monday bleach. It's filled with yellow liquid and linen strips. She grins. Smells bad, works great. You never look at white tunics the same way again. But the most impressive thing isn't the cleaning techniques. It's the fact that people kept going, day after day, with chamber pots, garderobes, sponges, vinegar, and elbow grease. There were no gloves, number, soap brands, no air fresheners, just ritual and routine. You sit by the fire that night, boots drying beside you, and realize something. In the quiet corners of medieval life, there were people constantly fighting back the tide of filth, not with disgust, but with duty. Tomorrow, you're told, you'll visit a monastic bathroom. They say it's the cleanest in the land. You sincerely hope they're right. Asterisk. The next morning, you head for higher ground, a monastery. They say monks live clean lives, peaceful, disciplined, silent. You're hoping their toilets reflect that silence. The monastery is perched on a grassy hill, wrapped in fog and birdsong. A bell chimes somewhere out of sight. You step into the cloister courtyard and are immediately struck by the calm. No shouting, no chamber pots being dumped. Just soft sandals on stone and the faint scent of beeswax and herbs. A hooded monk greets you with a nod. He doesn't speak, but gestures for you to follow. You walk through corridors, lined with illuminated manuscripts, past rows of sleeping cells, and into a surprisingly modern-looking structure, a long stone building with arched vents and a gentle slope leading downhill. This, he whispers, is the monk's bathroom. You step inside and find a row of stone seats spaced respectfully apart, with holes carved out and flowing water running beneath. That's right. Running water. Some monasteries had cleverly engineered systems to redirect nearby streams. The water would flow continuously under the latrines, carrying away waste and keeping the space surprisingly odor-free. You've entered the Rolls-Royce of medieval sanitation, and there's a quiet dignity to it all. No graffiti, no carved hearts, or rude scribbles. Just polished stone, flickering candlelight, and the faint sound of water echoing through the trough. You sit, hesitantly. It's almost peaceful. You wonder if monks meditate here, if they think about God or soup recipes, or the next chapter of the manuscript they're copying. You picture one monk slowly cleaning a goose quill while waiting his turn, another adjusting his robe in contemplative silence. And then you spot something odd. A small wooden shelf holding cloth rolls and a clay pitcher of water. Yes, this monastery has its own version of toilet paper and bidets, centuries ahead of their time. The cloths are washed daily by designated brothers. The water is scented with rosemary. You're not sure you want to leave, but as you poke around the edges, you learn there are rules. Monks had set hours for bathroom visits, usually after meals or before evening prayers. Talking was forbidden. Cleanliness was next to godliness, but so was silence. If you broke wind, you were expected to bow your head in apology, not for the noise, but for the distraction it might cause. You're told of a monk named Brother Cedric, who once sneezed and apologized to the entire chapter for an hour. Legend says they made him clean the privy walls with a blessed rag as penance. The monastery also had private rules for illness. If you were sick, you had a separate stall. If your stomach grumbled loudly during prayers, you might be sent for a day of rest. Health was taken seriously. Dysentery could decimate a chapter. Historians still debate whether these clean monasteries were the exception or the rule. Some argue they represented rare oases of order in a messy world. Others believe the quiet dignity may have been exaggerated in later writings. You don't care. You're sitting on a dry stone seat, with rosemary-scented water, and the kind of peace modern spa-goers dream about. As you leave, the monk presses a small linen square into your hand. A gift, he says, for your journey. You hold it like a relic, and honestly, it might be. That night, back in the tavern, you carefully unfold your linen square and tuck it into your pouch. You don't use it. Not yet. It's a symbol now, a reminder that somewhere in the chaos of medieval toilets, someone thought to add a touch of grace. Tomorrow, you'll visit the other kind of toilet again, but tonight, you sleep with rosemary on your hands and a monk's wisdom in your pocket. Asterisk, it was bound to happen. After the peaceful hush of the monastery, you find yourself back in the grubby, chatty world of commoners, and with it, a much louder bathroom culture. You're in a medieval city during market day. Stalls line the cobbled streets. Hawkers shout about turnips and trinkets. Pigs wander underfoot, and just beyond the bakery you spot it. A public latrine. No walls, no roof, just a long bench with holes, placed over a shallow trench that's seen far too much. You hesitate. A man chewing on an onion waves you over and says, "Don't worry. Smells worse if you stand still." So you take your place. You sit. You immediately regret it. The air is thick. There's laughter, gossip, one person whittling a spoon, and another loudly composing a poem about goats. Privacy. None. Comfort. Also none. Entertainment value. Strangely high. You realize that medieval toilets, especially public ones, were community spaces. People didn't just relieve themselves. They chatted, argued, even negotiated business deals. It was a place where walls came down, literally and figuratively. One woman next to you tells you about her cousin's wedding. Another asks if you've tried the honey cakes from the stall near the tannery. A child 2 seats away is humming a very out-of-tune love song. You shift slightly and notice something squishy beneath your boot. Don't look down. Just don't. What's truly fascinating is that these public latrines were often maintained by guilds or city authorities. Some had attendants who handed out rags. Others had a small fee, 1 coin for a clean seat. Sometimes, people even tipped for their favorite spot. You learn from a city official that during festivals or holy days, temporary toilets were built near churches. Wooden boards, covered trenches, and a lot of hoping it didn't rain. There's a debate among historians about how sanitary these places actually were. Some point to archaeological evidence showing surprisingly well-drained trenches and layers of ash used to cover waste. Others argue that rats, insects, and overflow were constant problems, especially in poorer districts. What's not debated is the noise. There's no silence here. Someone always has a story, or a strong opinion, or a flute. You hear someone tune a lute 2 seats away. But here's the thing, you get used to it. You adjust your cloak. You nod along with the spoon whittler's tale of the haunted butter churn. You even contribute a line to the goat poem, and as strange as it is, you feel connected. Back in the tavern that evening, someone asks if you've tried the bench near the bridge. You nod. Good breeze, right? They say. You nod again. The public latrine may not be elegant, it may not be quiet, but it belongs to the people. It's a place where status fades, where everyone is just a human being on a bench, trying to get through the day. Tomorrow, they say, you'll learn how travelers managed without any of this. You suspect it involves bushes. Asterisk, you've explored the monastery's peaceful rear. You've survived the chaotic city latrines. Now imagine this. You're on the road, walking between towns, your cloak flapping in the breeze, your feet aching, and your stomach making that unmistakable gurgle. There's no inn in sight, no latrine, no chamber pot, just open fields, curious crows, and a single, slightly judgmental sheep. Welcome to the traveler's dilemma. Medieval folks, pilgrims, merchants, messengers spent weeks, sometimes months, on foot or horseback. And when nature called, well, nature answered. Your guide today is a cheerful tinker named Hal. He's been walking the same trade route for 17 years, and his philosophy is simple. Find a bush, face away from the wind, and mind the thorns. Hal shows you his preferred spots along the road behind a specific oak, near a bend in the river, and once, memorably, inside a hollowed-out log. You take notes. Respectfully, some travelers carried portable chamber pots, often made of leather-lined wood or ceramic. Others brought linen squares or moss bundles for wiping, and many just didn't bother. You find a discarded tunic hanging from a tree and Hal shakes his head. Poor fella probably underestimated the berries. Then there's the matter of etiquette. If traveling in a group, you'd step aside and give others space. Women often used cloaks for privacy. Some wealthier pilgrims traveled with servants who'd dig makeshift holes and clean up afterward. It was a grim job, tipped only in dry bread and awkward gratitude. You try digging a small trench with a travel spoon. It, sort of works. A traveler, passing by, nods and mutters, nice form. Sometimes, roads had way stations, simple huts or stables where you could relieve yourself, water your horse, or avoid rain. These stations varied wildly. Some were maintained by local monasteries. Others were just glorified sheds with a roof and a bucket. And when you couldn't find either, you improvised behind hedges, near abandoned wells, or along riverbanks. Some used tree bark, others preferred straw. One inventive traveler tells you he reuses waxed parchment scraps. You politely decline his offer to demonstrate. Historians still debate the actual health risks of this behavior. On one hand, the fresh air and natural decay helped prevent buildup. On the other, rivers downstream from popular travel routes sometimes turned into, well, brownish highways. You cross one such bridge and gag slightly. Hal shrugs. Don't drink downstream from pilgrims, he advises, as evening falls. You camp under the stars, wondering how many people have shared this very patch of grass in very similar ways. The stars above twinkle. A night owl hoots. Somewhere far off, a donkey brays. You lie back, clutching a piece of cloth that once served as someone's emergency napkin, and think, somehow, despite the chaos, the discomfort, and the ever-present smell of traveling humanity, it works. Medieval people may not have had plumbing or porcelain, but they had resilience, adaptability, and a willingness to make do with moss and good humor. You roll over and drift to sleep, dreaming of streams that always flow upstream, bushes that politely look away, and a magical cloak that smells like rosemary. Tomorrow, Hal says, you'll visit a noble estate. They apparently have indoor plumbing. You suspect they're lying. Asterisk, you wake up with a stiff back, a damp cloak, and a renewed appreciation for civilization, even if that civilization uses wooden benches and cold water. Hal, ever chipper, waves you forward. Come on, he says. Time to visit the fancy folk. You trudge uphill to a noble estate, a grand manor of stone and timber, surrounded by rose hedges and peacocks with an inflated sense of purpose. The air smells of lavender and old wealth. Servants bustle about carrying baskets, brass pitchers, and waits a perfumed cushion. The lady of the house greets you in embroidered linen and gestures toward the back of the estate. We pride ourselves on our modern conveniences, she says with a wink. That's when you see it. The garderobe. That sounds elegant. It isn't. The nobleman's toilet is built into the outer wall of the house, a tall wooden cupboard-looking structure with a wooden seat and a vertical shaft that opens directly into the moat. Yes, the moat, and no, you're not dreaming. This isn't a metaphor. Waste dropped through the shaft and plopped straight into the water below. In theory, it was washed away. In reality, it sat there, floating, festering, adding a rather unpleasant ambience to the courtyard. Swan Pond. You climb the narrow stairs and take a look. There's a lavender sachet nailed to the wall. Someone carved a rose into the seat. It's the most noble latrine you've ever seen, and still, it stinks. A servant hands you a cloth napkin and politely stands nearby holding a candle. You wave him away. He does not go. Garderobes came in all styles. Some were simple wooden shelves. Others had hinged lids, and the fanciest included a draught chimney, an early attempt at odor control, but most nobles just burned aromatic herbs, opened windows, or pretended not to notice. You learn from a steward that during feasts, guests were advised to evacuate early so as not to disrupt the music. Those who didn't were given a perfumed handkerchief and seated near the harpsichord. Toilet paper, still a luxury. Rich nobles used cloth, wool scraps, or even pages from disfavored books. Yes, medieval reprints of Cicero met a grim end. You whisper this to Hal, and he gasps. Poor Cicero, he says. Never saw it coming. There's another room nearby larger, with 3 connected seats. The family latrine. Apparently, nobles sometimes use the toilet together, not for bonding, but because they simply didn't think of privacy the way we do. Some historians say these garderobes also doubled as wardrobes, literally where people hung clothes, because it was believed the rising ammonia killed lice. You glance at a nearby tunic swaying above the shaft. You decide not to comment. There are rules, of course. Only certain servants were allowed to clean the shaft. Some wore special gloves. Others just drank heavily. It was a respected but unpleasant job, called the gong farmer in cities, and latrine knight in fancier homes. The titles sounded noble. The smell was not. You're told that once a year, the moat is dredged. We make a festival of it, says the steward. There's music, bread. No one swims for a week after the noble lady returns and asks how you found the facilities. You nod politely and say something vague about the craftsmanship of the hinges. She smiles. We're quite proud. As you leave, Hal mutters, if that's nobility, I'll take a bush. You agree, because in the end, even the wealthiest medieval toilet was still, well, a hole above some water, with a little more embroidery and slightly less shame. Asterisk after leaving the noble estate, you decide you've seen enough of moats, perfumed cloths. But Hal has one more surprise for you. We're going rural, he says, grinning. And so, you follow a winding trail toward a tiny medieval village, nestled between rolling hills and buzzing hedgerows. Chickens peck at the dirt. A dog naps in the shade of a cart. Somewhere in the distance, someone is yelling at a goat. It's charming, it's quiet, and it smells earthy. This, Hal explains, is toilet life for the peasantry. You're introduced to a family of 5 who live in a thatched roof cottage. They're warm, generous, and very honest about bodily functions. Their bathroom is a wooden shed near the compost heap. Inside, you find a simple seat over a dirt pit, with straws scattered for freshness, and a curtain that blows gently in the wind often, revealing more than it hides. No moat, no servants, no shame, just function. And here's the twist. The family recycles everything. Waste is collected, composted, and eventually spread on the fields. It's called night soil, and while the name sounds poetic, the job of collecting it is anything but. Every few days, someone, the youngest child, usually empties the bucket, adds ash or sawdust, and makes sure it's far from the well. It's a chore like any other. Feed the pigs, haul water, manage waste. Simple, yes, but effective. You learn that some villages even had communal pits, fenced off and rotated every season. Others used running ditches, lined with rocks, which were occasionally scrubbed with bramble bundles. Nobody liked it, but everyone needed it. There's a grandmother who tells you, with pride, how she once held it for 2 whole festivals. Her daughter rolls her eyes. Then comes the mystery item, a smooth, round pottery shard, used for wiping. It's the good one, the grandfather says. Saved for feast days. You nod with grave respect. What's most impressive is the resourcefulness. Cloth is too valuable. Paper doesn't exist yet. But moss, straw, and pottery, all fair game. And unlike in cities, rural folks know where their water comes from and where it shouldn't go. That means strict latrine rules, no dumping near the stream. Always use the Southfield pit, and never interrupt someone mid-squat unless you want. A stern lecture, and possibly a thrown chicken. You join the family for a simple dinner of barley stew. Conversation drifts easily. At no point does anyone pretend toilets are glamorous. They're just part of life. There's something peaceful about it. The stars rise. The wind shifts. Someone starts snoring. You lie down near the hearth, thinking about how much work medieval people did just to do something we now flush and forget. And maybe, just maybe, you appreciate your bathroom a little more now. Hal pokes the fire and says, "Tomorrow, we talk about toilet medicine." You pretend to be asleep. Morning arrives with the soft clatter of wooden spoons and the faint smell of oatcakes. You stretch under a wool blanket, blinking at the smoky sunlight filtering through the cottage beams. Hal is already awake, humming some tune about onions and destiny. "Today," he says, "you'll learn about what happened when toilets failed and medieval medicine had to step in." You're led to a nearby herbalist's hut, tucked between the orchard and a suspiciously fragrant pile of compost. Inside, shelves sag under the weight of dried plants, yarrow, sage, rue, even nettles. A woman in a faded indigo robe greets you with a smile that suggests she's seen things no one should have to see. Constipation and curses. She says, cheerfully, "That's half my business." You sit down on a stool and begin to understand just how intertwined toilets and treatments were. Because in a world without plumbing, digestive problems weren't just inconvenient, they were dangerous too. Much rich food, stuck. Too many root vegetables, also stuck. A cold wind from the north, apparently, still stuck. The cure, well, it varied. Some remedies were herbal, fennel tea, mashed figs, or hot garlic oil rubbed on the stomach while chanting the name of St. Elmo. Others were more aggressive. A heated metal rod, inserted where the sun don't shine. Clay-based suppositories wrapped in goose fat. Or if you were truly desperate, a potion made of boiled leeks and sheep urine. You ask Hal if he's tried any of these. He goes very quiet. For diarrhea, things weren't better. The herbalist recommends toasted barley flour mixed with ash, taken with a prayer. Some nobles swore by crushed pearls. Others just blamed demons. Yes, actual demons. In fact, one manuscript suggests that intestinal wind was the result of evil spirits lodging themselves near the spleen. The only solution was to scream into a copper bowl, then bury it at midnight under a yew tree. Does it work? You ask. The herbalist shrugs. Sometimes the screaming helps. You flip through her notebook, marveling at the delicate illustrations of intestines, annotated with cheerful phrases like "possibly explodes," and "don't try this during Lent." And here's the best part. Most people didn't separate bathroom needs from healing. It was one continuous loop: what went in, what came out, and what happened when it got stuck halfway. You help her grind some dried rhubarb into a powder. "This one's for the monks," she says. "They sit too much." By sunset, you've learned more about the medieval digestive system than you ever expected. And somehow, you feel soothed, because behind all the awkwardness, all the smells, and uncomfortable tools, there's a kind of quiet honesty in it. These people didn't have perfect systems, but they worked with what they had. They laughed about it. They wrote it down in books. And they passed it on. As you say goodbye to Hal and the herbalist, She gives you a tiny cloth bag. Inside is a pinch of dried mint and sage for your dreams, she says. You thank her and mean it. So now, with your head filled with wooden seats, moss wipes, and surprisingly philosophical poop rituals, you're finally home again. Your bed feels a little softer, your bathroom feels like a palace, and the next time you flush, maybe you'll hear the whisper of medieval chamber pots and quietly say a thank you to the peasants, monks, and herbalists who paved the way, sometimes quite literally. You close your eyes, and somewhere, in the distance, Hal is still humming, "Good night."